I'm going to walk through this presentation with you, which I would normally do in class, but here we are. So you can find it in files. You can also find it in the modules if you go here to the Grids and Shapes Workshop PDF. I'm going to make this full screen. So the idea is just, where do you start with hand lettering? How do you structure a letter? And I want you to think about, breaking down a letter into its basic form. And compare that to like a gesture drawing class, or if you're drawing the human figure, the way that you start is just by drawing basic lines and shapes, right? And then those build up to create a human form. So you don't just draw a perfect human figure, you break it down first. So similarly, I want you to find the gestures, this should be in quotations, within the letter forms. So I think this is a really good example with this M. It clearly has some consistency, using the circle as kind of this base to then create the arch of the M. And so both of the arches are perfectly symmetrical. And we also have a rectangle here. So you can see how using kind of these different shapes then combines to create this letter. I know for some people that might sound really abstract, and it can be, but don't overthink it, if that makes sense. This is another one. Again, you can just kind of see there's like this grid that's in the background, and that's a guide that helps to shape and form this letter G. And you can see there's some circles that help kind of form this arch as well. Have some triangle shapes going on here in this foot. Another rectangle. So again, it's just, like when you're drawing a person, when you're drawing really anything, you're breaking things down into shapes. So I just want you to be cognizant of that when you're drawing letters. Here's some more you can look at. I love how they use these circles to form this curve here. It's just thinking, for some people, you will approach letters more mathematically, more geometrically, because that's how you think. Other people will approach it more organically, and that's fine as well. There's lots of different approaches. I just want to show you a few things so you can figure out what works for you. Okay. Another few. This one is more of a digital version of, looking at something like this that's a little bit more traditionally how typographers might develop a letter. You can see all of these different points and how it curves. This is an interesting curve right here. Just a few more examples. Again, kind of noticing, I like the R, how we see this stroke is a part of this circle here. And then again, so a rectangle, part of a circle, like a half circle that forms this letter. For the U, it's again going to be two rectangles and then a circle that helps to form that. Just another look at all of these circles that create that G. I think this is one of my favorite letters, is this lowercase g that has all of these different strokes that kind of wind and bend. I think it's really fun. Okay, so the shapes is more about individual letters. For grids, it's more of a design tool. So again, if a grid isn't super helpful for you, then don't get too worried about it. But I just want you to kind of play around with it and see what it can do. So for this, the grid, it just helps to maintain consistency between different letters. And that's, again, if a look that you like, that's something that's a little bit more uniform, you can then have these letters. So you can see like the shape of the B is very similar to the shape of the R. It just has a different stroke here on the bottom. And again, same with, you have the U, which is the same as the N, it's just upside down. And then taking that to then make the A. So it's just very similar to the N, except a little bit larger. And then has this stroke here. So how do you create harmony with multiple words? So that's another thing that a grid can be really helpful with, is maybe when you're creating a composition, you just want to kind of quickly sketch out the general grid shapes and how you want the letters to flow together. And this can help you with hierarchy, deciding, what word is the most important, what do I want to emphasize, and how can you just organize them so that it can be read clearly. One thing I want to point out is that, so this class with hand letters, it's part illustration and it's part design. So there are certainly maybe different techniques that I will show you. But don't forget that you already have many tools in your pocket that you've been developing in your core classes as an illustrator or maybe another program. So think about how you approach things as an illustrator, but also thinking about how these kinds of tools can also help you maybe approach something in a new way. Okay, so these are some other examples of just starting with kind of a basic shape or grid and thinking about how letters and words fit together. Okay, this is the one that I wanted to talk about. So again, this is more of a design approach and just thinking about things, but this will give you some vocabulary that can be really helpful. And this is also in your reading packet, and it will be on the quiz, so memorize this, and I'm not joking. But just some kind of things to notice. So this is a baseline. So the kind of imaginary line that words sit on, that's what that's called. We have spaces in between. We have the letters are made of strokes, stems for some. You have descenders and ascenders. The little feet are called serifs. If it's a sans serif, that means there's no feet. We'll talk a little bit more about that. One thing that to pay attention to, so on this one, it's called an aperture, kind of like any of the open spaces. It could also be called a counter. So all of these are open counters. You could also fill up this space, and that would be a closed counter. So just pay attention to that. And I think this is interesting. I wanted to show that, a lot of the terms that we use, they come from letterpress, and when printers, newspapers, put these letters together, and they, are actually working with like physical letters. So when we talk about leading as the space between words and lines of words, that came from, literal lead bars that were placed in between each line of words. So it's just something to keep in mind. And you can also see how these are arranged. So these little bars here, these are leading bars. And then the kerning is between the individual letters. Again, there's more about that in your reading packet. So for this workshop, I also want you to think about, how can you make a grid? It doesn't have to be just perpendicular and parallel lines. You can figure out how, once you start using and thinking about grids, you can also think about how can they be more interesting? How can you, quote unquote, break the grid? So I thought this was a fun one, just seeing kind of how there's all these words going in different directions, but Jessica Hish has organized them with a pretty interesting grid, I think. You could also think about the letter itself being a grid and, or using a different shape. and putting and organizing words in that way. So hand lettering is a way to make letters fluid and interesting in a way that set type can't. And that's what's so fun about hand lettering, is it is an illustration, it is design, but I really think it's design elevated. It's a way to really take things and mix them together in a way that a physical block letter just can't be. Okay, so we're looking at different types of grids, and you'll be able to use them and think about how they can manipulate the word, how you can manipulate the word. So I'll show you a few examples. So this is one grid that you can actually use. This is in the files section. But think about, how does changing perspective adjust how your letters appear? If you're looking at it from above or from the side, how does that change it? This grid I thought was really interesting. It is a more organic, just hand-drawn lines, and you can see how the different line shapes then affect the shapes of the letters, and how, some are really squished and some are really big. This is from a workshop that I did at Micah with a design firm from Korea, and they did this same workshop where they gave us a few grids and then asked us to put the letters of our name into these different shapes. And you can use it in a lot of different ways. So you can see, I mostly stuck to how does a letter look like in this one shape. But you could also, make it really large and have the letters go into multiple shapes. The grid is just kind of a jumping off point to figure out, what can I do with this letter, and how can the shapes within these letters be more interesting? So this is your assignment. This date is wrong. I'm sorry about that. Refer to the date in Canvas now. So for the assignment, I want you to, 1, choose 3 different letters that are very different from each other. So you might choose a W and a Q and an R, right? Those all have very different shapes. And I just want you to break them down, draw, notice the shapes that are within each letter, notice the circles, the lines, and just what makes them unique. And you can also try drawing them in different ways. What does it look like with a serif versus not? Maybe you try something very experimental. Second, I want you to use the grids that are in the file section and experiment fitting letters or words onto the different lines, and just play around with, how does the grid shift how the letter might look or behave. And then I believe this says create 3. I think I said create 1 or 2 of your own grids and fit the letters and words into your own grid in an interesting way. So these are all in Canvas. I think I can go to, let's go to modules. Okay, so I don't have the grids here, so you'll need to go to the files, workshops, and then if you come here to grids, you can see these different ones. So this is something you can print out if you want to, or you can just put it straight into your iPad or Photoshop and just kind of play around. There's really not a lot of rules. This is just about playing and kind of getting to know the letters and have fun with them. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Again, here I want to go to the assignment because I want to point out something important. This is the Grids and Shapes workshop. So I have here, so just create 1 of your own grids. So use this guideline. This is more accurate and up to date. And last but not least, don't forget to have fun. This is a chance to manipulate letter forms, so just don't worry about being perfect. Yeah, that's the most important thing.